Afternoon and good evening. For those of you joining us across the globe today, we have a very diverse group of individuals representing the webinar today. So thank you everybody for joining. My name is Brock Griffin and I'm the CEO of JBW Group International. We've got a lot of information to cover today, but I just wanted to take a moment to thank our host, Peter Cruz. Thank you for running the show, Peter. And I'll try to get through this without stumbling too much. So before we get started, I wanted to just give a little bit of history on JBW Group for those that aren't quite familiar with us quite yet. JBW Group was international was founded in 2002 by John. We're a full service information security consultancy. And while today's webinar is focused on ISO 27001 and the new updates to the 2022 version, we are experienced and certified in ISO 27001, 27701, ISO 20000 and 28000, and ISO 20017 and 18, which are our newer ones around cloud security. So we work with companies all over the world, and we have a true global reach across many different industry verticals. We span healthcare, financial, pharmaceutical, energy, and telecommunications, and we can really work with companies of any size, from all the way from Fortune 50 companies all the way down to those companies with just a handful of employees. I'm not going to read verbatim there, but what I wanted to do next is introduce John Weaver. John is our speaker and presenter today, and he's our subject matter expert in all things ISO 27001, and his experience in information security has spanned over 3 decades. And while he has very deep experience in information security, he really found a passion in the information assurance space. And following that passion, John founded JBW Group in 2002. He found a need to help organizations navigate through the complexities of ISO 27001. And as many of you can attest, certifying on ISO 27001 is not for the faint of heart. It involves a great deal of foresight, attention to detail, and willingness to keep at the task at hand. And companies like JBW are here to help keep everything straight and on track. And as you can see, as you will see in the following slides, John's passion for information assurance still burns strong. And if there's anyone that can make ISO 27001 to 2022 version exciting, it's going to be John. He has a very deep experience in information assurance, and he's worked in leadership roles throughout information security industry with a deep history of collaboration in law enforcement and his many speaking and consulting engagements. He's really set himself apart as one of the industry's leading minds when it comes to information assurance. And as I said, as we progress through the slides, you can really see his passion and his knowledge shine through. He'll be a great resource for you today. So feel free to reach out, use the chat button if you have any questions, get them in there, and then we'll be able to answer those at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to John, and he can get us started on today's transition webinar. So John, you have the wheel.
Great. Thanks, Brock. Appreciate the kind words. So I want to myself welcome everyone to the webinar. I think there are some old friends out there tuning in, and some friends we just haven't met yet. So thanks for carving out the time to join us today. As you know, the International Organization for Standardization released a new version of ISO 27001 in November of 2022. That's a 9-year stretch from the previous version, 2013. The changes that have occurred in our industry in those 9 years are pretty remarkable as you consider the growth of cloud computing, the focus on privacy and other issues. The ISO organization tries to review and update standards every 5 years. So our waiting for 9 years for this new release is pretty atypical, but it also reflects the complexity of the task at hand and the information that resides within the standard. So there is good news. Good news is there's no real radical changes from the previous version. General requirements are nearly the same, but there are a few changes in the general requirements and fewer controls from the previous version that we need to be aware of. There are some also changes that'll be required on the part of certificate holders. I'm sure that not everyone on the call is working with an organization that is certified to ISO 27001. So we'll talk sort of about the general case, but also the specific case as you begin your quest to do the transition for certification to the 2022 version. So just an overview of the changes. Clearly, there are significant changes in the title between the previous and the current versions of the standard. And I think this change, reflects a shift in focus from strictly technology to broader objectives for information security, which include technology, the cybersecurity piece, as well as governance and privacy protection. I'm sure everyone with experience in international, the global world has awareness of the EU General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, that became law in 2018, May 25th of 2018, and I think is more than a little influence in the modifications of the new version of the standard. Just some general observations. As I said in the intro, there are no big surprises. The intent of the standard is generally the same, managing risk for your organization and providing information assurance throughout the organization. A lot has happened in our industry in the last 9 years. This new version, the 2022 version, attempts to address many of those changes. And I think the reality is that some of the changes have already passed by the 2022 version. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But it certainly is more reflective of the environment we live in today than the previous 2013 version. One of the things that I'm really relieved about is a lot of the ISOized language has been dropped in favor of plain English. They told us in the early days that the language of the standard was so bizarre or ISOized as to facilitate translation into 120 different languages. Well, they've sort of dropped that ISOized language, and a lot of the controls and statements in the standard are much more recognizable as plain English. Many of the control descriptions have been broadened, simplified, and generalized, and that can be good and bad. It's easier to implement a control if it's very specific. When we are faced with a control that's pretty broad or generalized, it requires a little more thinking in order to implement the control. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. There is plenty of great information in ISO 27002, the 2022 version. Provides a lot of information about implementation guidance and helps define and explain a lot of the controls that may be a little nebulous in the way they're stated in Annex A. We have seen substitution of the word rule for policy in the 2022 version. So where a policy may be explicitly described in the standard, the word rule is substituted. So you can take that as you will. If you have a policy for secure software development, for example, that's still valid. But if there is a case where you're implementing something in one of the new controls, there may not be a policy required, but you will still need to provide evidence of conformance in some manner. Clause 1 of the standard, the scope of the standard is identical to 2013, with the exception that where 2013 talked about this international standard, that language has been replaced by document in the 2022 version. Requirements remain the same. Clause 4 for 10 must be implemented. There are no exceptions for exclusion of controls in the general requirements section. The new version of the standard has still been prepared by the ISO IEC Joint Technical Committee, Subcommittee 27, same as the previous version. The format of the general requirements looks the same, following ISO IC Directive Part 1, Annex SL, for all you ISO nerds out there. It refers to this to the standard as this document, as opposed to this international standard. There's an extended forward section with additional legalese that covers things like proprietary information, or trademarking, that sort of thing. So it's clear that the lawyers got a hold of this version before it got published. This version of the standard incorporates the technical core agenda from 2014 and 2015. We can talk a little bit about that. One is just a formatting change. The other is a little bit more of a significant change to the standard. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The Clause 2 of the standard, normative references, still includes ISO 27000 as having some or all of the content as required. That's a little bit of a change from the 2013 version of the standard, which states that 27000 is indispensable in implementation of the standard. It's a little less focused there, with the awareness that there are lots of other sources for information around information security. Terms and definitions, there are just a few additions in the 2022 version. Terms and definitions reference ISO 27000, as previously was the case. Also includes 2 online references, one from the ISO and one from IEC. You'll see that those links in the standard, but they're included as being available for additional reference. Clause 4, now we're getting into the meat of the standard. Context of the organization. These sections are identical between the 2013 version and the 2022 version, with a couple of exceptions. The first one I would note, and I think it's significant, it's a note that references ISO 31000. In the 2013 version, the reference is to ISO 31000 2009. In my humble opinion, the 20009 version is far more useful, specifically for its treatment of context of the organization, understanding the nuances in what that statement entails. I think it's a very useful resource. The 2018 version, in my opinion, is not much more than a rehash of ISO 27005, which is risk management for information security management systems. I think there's a lot of goodness in the 2009 version. So if you have a copy or can obtain a copy, I would hang on to it. I think it's very useful. Clause 4.4, information security management system. the statement regarding implementation, management, continual improvement adds a reference to the processes needed and their interactions. So this is a nod to the fact that the ISO standard is considered a process standard that processes have inputs and outputs and interact with other processes. So this is a change and a little bit more of a focus on the process-oriented aspects. Leadership requirements between 2022 and 2013 are nearly identical. There is a note in the 2022 version referencing business as interpreted to mean activities core to the purpose of the organization. That sort of points back to the very first statement in context of the organization, clause 4, that talks about the purpose of the organization. So they're re-emphasizing why does the organization exist, and being able to understand and articulate that as part of your implementation is important, particularly in the aspect of the work that the responsibilities of the leadership within the organization. Just a minor change in 5.2, policy removes an and in describing one of the describing the requirements of the policy. It just lists those requirements. Clause 5.3, organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities are assigned and communicated within the organization. That's an addition that was not present in the 2013 version of the standard. Clause 6, planning requirements. That this is our risk management methodology piece. These requirements are nearly identical. There are notes added to 6.1.3 referencing Annex A controls as possible versus comprehensive, which was how they were described in the 2013 version. Reference to control objectives implicitly included has also been dropped. 8.6.3D incorporates technical corrigendum 2 from 2015, which is basically a formatting change in the standard regarding the statement of applicability. It's still like same identical information, it's just a formatting change within the standard. 6.2 planning requirements are nearly identical with these added requirements around information security objectives shall be monitored and be available as documented information. This is a non-trivial addition, considering that objectives are typically stated in the policy, but we don't necessarily always track them in a way that we can provide evidence. So being monitored and being available as documented information is going to be one of those critical additions as we look at implementing the 2022 version. And we have a new clause in the standard general requirements, clause 6.3, planning of changes. So this states when the organization determines the need for changes to the information security management system, the changes shall be carried out in a planned manner. So this is specifically pointing to what we're doing for risk treatment for the organization. We need to be tracking and controlling the changes as we implement risk treatment plans, any other activities that would be impactful to the information security management system. We need to be able to provide evidence. Clause 7, support, is nearly identical. Resources, competence, awareness, communication, and documented information. There are a couple of changes. In 7.4 communications, there's actually been what I would consider to be a merging of requirements in the 2022 version. So we only have 4 requirements for communication. That third bullet, how to communicate, sort of incorporates who shall communicate in the process by which communication shall be effected. One other note in 7.5 documented information, and this is really subtle. I'm not sure how the committee came up with this, but the note states that access can imply decisions regarding viewing and editing. The 2013 version notes that access implies decisions regarding viewing and editing. So I'm not really sure what they were driving at, except that I might have access to a particular bit of documented information. I may be able to view it, but not edit it. It's a subtle change in the wording. I don't think it's impactful as we move forward on implementation. Clause 8, operation. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road here, with regard to implementing the risk management methodology that we talked about in clause 6. There's some additional specificity included in version 2022 regarding operational planning and control. And there are a couple of additional clauses that are emphasized from clause 6, establishing criteria for processes and implementing controls of the processes, control of the processes in accordance with the criteria. So basically, why are we implementing this control? What are we expecting the control to accomplish? And then we've implemented the control. Is it meeting the requirements that we set out for it? Kind of a subtle change, but it's looking at control activities and being able to address whether or not the control is meeting risk management requirements for the organization. There's a statement, documented information shall be available. In the previous version, the organization was responsible for maintaining this documentation. That requirement has been dropped in the 2022 version. Yep, thank you. Performance evaluation, clause 9. 9.1, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. The content is nearly identical, but there's been a little shuffling of the order of information. Version 2022 incorporates the note that's listed in the 2013 version into clause 9.1b, methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation as applicable to ensure valid results. The methods selected should produce comparable and reproducible results considered to be valid. That's considered, the note in 2013 was considered important enough to include as part of the standard verbiage of the standard. Version 2022 is a little more direct in specifying documentation shall be available as evidence of the results. Further added in the statement from version 2013 at the beginning of clause 9.1. The organization shall evaluate information security performance and the effectiveness of the information security management system. Also with 9.1, I mentioned the updated note and the specification of documented evidence. So we can skip to the next slide. Thank you. Got ahead of myself there. Clause 9.2, internal audit. This is also nearly identical, but the subcommittee 27 took the necessary step, I think, of dividing the internal audit section into two clauses. 9.2.1 talks about, it's identical to the paragraphs in the version 2023, but it splits out into a separate clause. Basically, the 9.2.1 and 9.2.2 talk about requirements for internal audit, and 9.2.2 talks about actually conducting the internal audit from the audit requirements. So a little better organized in 2022, and some specificity around the actual execution of the internal audit. Management review. So 9.3.1, this section is pretty much identical to the initial paragraph in 2013. Again, for the sake of clarity, ISO has broken this out into three separate clauses. There are some interesting implications as we look at review of inputs and review of outputs as compared to the 2022 version. 9.3.2 is a restatement of the second paragraph in version 2013. It's just broken out as a separate clause. And there is some information expanding the clause 9.3.2c, needs of interested parties. There's a change also in the wording for 9.3.3, management review of the results, not outputs as it's stated in the previous version. Oh, and I got ahead of myself again. This is the specifics around output versus results. Clause 10, improvement. This is basically identical, but the order of the clauses has been reversed. So ISO is emphasizing the importance of continual improvement, including that as first in clause 10.1. 10.2, nonconformity and corrective action, is essentially the tool that we use in order to assure continual improvement, which is the initial objective. Really, the biggest changes with the standard are organizational controls in terms of volumes of changes and reflection of our current information security management system environment as compared to 2013. There have been a number of changes controlled, some dropped, some merged. We'll take a look at some of those in specific, not too detailed, but a general overview to kind of start. So the structure of Annex A controls are still considered normative between the 2013 and the 2022 version, but as you can see, there's been a significant reduction in the number of control areas as defined in Annex A. We've reduced from 14 controls to, 14 control areas to 4. information controls, people controls, physical controls, and technological controls. Also, the number is reduced from 114 total controls to 93 controls. With the new version of the standard, there are 11 new controls, controls we haven't seen previously in the 2013 version, 14 controls that have been dropped from the 2013 version, and by my count, 13 controls that combine 2 or more controls from 2013. The others, the remaining controls are nearly identical to their counterparts in the 2013 version of the standard. Where the controls are similar between versions, in many cases, the 2022 version simplifies or generalizes the requirements. I sort of alluded to that in the introductory section. The new controls really reflect changes in our information security environment. And a lot of them are things that organizations are already doing. I give the examples of 8.5.7 threat intelligence and 8.5.23 information security for use of cloud services. These are all things that organizations are already doing. We're just, this is the opportunity for the standard to catch up a little bit. As sort of a general comparison, the column on the right is the previous controls or areas, control areas. Many of the controls in these control areas have been entered into the 2020 version, 2022 version on the left. So organizational controls draw from that list on the right, 8.5 information security policy, 8.6 organization of information security, etc. So here's some of the new controls. Threat intelligence, as I mentioned, a lot of organizations are already monitoring for threat intelligence, looking at the SANS website for information, dealing with information security threats, and processing that information. But this is a new control, and again, as with all controls, we need to be able to provide evidence if we're considering it as applicable within our organization. 8.5.23, information security for use of cloud services. We see a lot of our clients are leveraging their supplier management risk program in order to address information security use for cloud services. We want to make sure that our organization, vendors that provide services to our organizations in this world of everything you can think of as a service, we want to make sure they're meeting or exceeding our requirements for information security. 8.7.4, here's one of the examples that I think the real world has maybe passed by the ISO standard a little bit. Physical security monitoring. Premises shall be continually monitored for unauthorized physical access. I think during the pandemic, so many organizations became virtual organizations that this control will be not applicable to a lot of organizations that no longer have physical premise. But it does pick up that same theme in 8.8.1, user endpoint devices. There's emphasis on making sure that endpoint devices are secure. If you have remote users that are accessing critical proprietary information, we want to make sure that those endpoint devices are secured and protected. 8.8.9 configuration management. Configurations including security configurations of hardware, software, services, and networks shall be established, documented, implemented, monitored, and reviewed. For those people that are familiar with ISO 20000 or IT service management, might tend to recognize this as a configuration management database type control. I don't think it's necessary to implement a CMDB for your organization to meet the requirements of this standard, but there will be a requirement to make sure that golden images of servers and end user devices are documented, maintained. Configuration of software, network maps, what network services are available, all that stuff is going to be required in order to be conformant with the 2022 version of the standard. 8.8.10, information deletion. There's a little bit of a reflection of GDPR in this, but also reflects sort of standard operating procedure for organizations that are retiring systems and scrub the disks. I think we've heard enough horror stories about systems being given to a nonprofit for resale that have proprietary customer information on them. So the specific information deletion clause has been added to the new standard. 8.8.11, data masking. This is something that we see frequently. For example, a help desk person might not be able to see the social security number or address of a person that is that they're on the phone with, someone that they're providing service for. So data masking is a way to preserve privacy and meet certain applicable legislation, depending on the country of operation where you're working. Data leakage prevention. This is an encore visit from the 2005 version. It's a little more refined. There was a data leakage prevention measures shall be applied to systems, networks, and any other devices that process, store, or transmit sensitive information. And I always think of elevator conversations or conversations in restaurants. So if you consider humans some other device, that would be applicable in this instance. 8.8.16, monitoring activities. Network systems and applications shall be monitored for anomalous behavior and appropriate actions taken to evaluate potential information security incidents. Again, a lot of organizations, most organizations are already doing this if they have a mature implementation of ISO 27001. We just need to be able to demonstrate it more explicitly in order to show conformance with the standard. 8.8.23, web filtering. We're talking about whitelist, blacklist, just avoiding exposure to malicious content and keeping employees that are internet connected sort of focused on the activities at hand. 8.8.23, secure coding. Secure coding principles shall be applied to software development. This is a little bit of a spin on secure coding policy, but the statement is that there is no longer a policy required, and it's a little more specific around what principles are going to be applied in terms of secure coding. As I mentioned, there are several controls that have been dropped. 8.6.2.1 mobile device policy. That's one of the controls that's been dropped. The content of that control partially addressed by 8.6.7, which is remote working, and 8.8.1 user endpoint devices, as we mentioned earlier. But the specifics around having a policy in place, that requirement has been dropped. Doesn't mean that if you have one that you should get rid of it. It just means it's up to the organization to determine what's appropriate for your organization. 8.11.1.6 delivery and loading areas. If you don't have a virtual office, or if you don't have a physical office and you're a virtual company, you don't really have any need for delivery and loading areas. So that control has been dropped. Again, 8.11.2.5, 8.11.2.8, those are physical security requirements. In the case of 8.11.2.5, that's partially addressed by 8.5.10, acceptable use of information and other assets. 8.12.4.3, administrative and operator logs, 8.12.6.2, restriction on software installation, and 8.13.2.3, electronic messaging. Those are all dropped from the 2022 version. (8.14.1.2), securing applications on application services on public networks has been dropped. I think that's an interesting choice of a control to drop. We certainly want to have application services on public networks secured. I guess the assessment of the subcommittee 27 was that this is already being done, and we shouldn't need to explicitly address that as a requirement. Same with 14.1.3. Protection of application services transactions. 8.14.2.3, technical review of applications after operating platform changes, also dropped. Restrictions on changes to software packages, 8.14.2.4. 8.14.2.6, secure development environment, which is partially addressed by 8.8.25, secure development lifecycle, and 8.8.31, separation of development test and production environments. Those are all dropped. And then 8.18.1.5, regulation of cryptographic controls, that has been specifically is dropped as well. So I won't go into great detail with the merge controls. Might leave this as an exercise for the reader, as they often say. I did want to mention 8.5.9 is a merging of a couple of controls which are addressed in Core Agendum 1 from 2014 relating to clause 8.8.1.1. The change specifically identifies information as an asset associated with information and information processing. And that's been included in 8.5.9, the 2022 version. So that's significant. Some more merge controls. If I look at 8.5.30, ICT readiness for business continuity. I think this might be the first ISO published example of the acronym for information and communication technology being incorporated into a published standard. Sort of an interesting trend if you're an ISO nerd like me. I would offer one caveat, and that's to carefully consider if a control is not applicable under um, ISO 27001, the 2022 version, if you're looking at one of the merged controls, which is not currently applicable under your current ISMS under the 2013 version. Also want to point out a very valuable resource in ISO 27002, the 2022 version. There's some really interesting information in there. We've had it for quite a lot longer than the actual standard itself. But I would confess that I didn't drill into it in real detail until November of last year, when the auditable version of the standard was finally published. 27002 provides information on control attributes for each control. So as you go through, as you know, the format of 27002 corresponds to Annex A controls. They're listed as the actual number rather than the A dot prefix. So 8.24 is listed in ISO 27002 as clause 8.24, for example. It lists attributes, all sorts of attributes. It also includes information around security domains, and the list of security domains is pretty extensive. If we look at operational capabilities, specifically it calls out governance, asset management, information protection, human resources security, physical security, and on and on and on. So there's a lot of great information there. Very helpful as you consider implementing controls and considering how you're going to provide evidence on control activities as part of the registration process. So some hot tips and critical information that I wanted to be sure and pass along. There's, at least in my mind, there's been a lot of question about how the registrars are handling this. And if you are a certified entity already, you need to get in touch with your registrar and figure out what their specific requirements are going to be. But the official deadline as set by the accreditation bodies and the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, the official deadline for compliance is October 31st, 2025. That's 36 months from the publication of the standard in November of 2022. The initial certification and recertification audits to the 2013 version will not be conducted after May 1st, 2024. That's sort of the recommendation, and this may vary somewhat with your registrar. So that's another reason to check in with them about what their requirements are going to be for the transition. Some registrars are requiring that transition audit occur now. Others are allowing continued certification to 2013 into some future date to be determined, I guess. But a safe bet after the May 1st, 2024 date, registrars will not be conducting audits to the 2013 version of the standard. I'm also hearing from the registrars about a gap analysis. So has the organization determined what the requirements are going to be in terms of demonstrating an effective transition to the new version of the standard. Gap analysis is maybe not a great description, but basically they want to assure that all of the requirements that have changed in the general requirements and any changes to controls in the 2022 version have been addressed, have been examined as part of your risk assessment, and you can provide evidence to prove that you have addressed those changes within your information security management system. As with all controls, the 11 new Annex A controls will require evidence to prove that the control is conforming to the requirements. So be prepared to provide that evidence of conformance. I mentioned this previously, 8.5.23, the information security for cloud services. Processes for acquisition, use, management, and exit from cloud services shall be established in accordance with the organization's information security requirements. As I mentioned, a lot of organizations are leveraging their supplier management risk program in order to affect this control. That's certainly one way to address it. There are others, but again, this is going to be critical if you're a cloud services user, everything as a service. You are going to need to demonstrate conformance with this control if you're claiming this control is being applicable. 8.8.9 configuration management. I talked a little bit about this previously also. Keeping track of all configurations for your infrastructure, software and services. That's going to be important to be able to demonstrate compliance. If you are an organization that's implemented CMDB in ServiceNow, for example, that's going to be your evidence there, as long as you're including the necessary configuration items. So I think being prepared for the transition is not going to be a huge lift, but there are some significant areas that we need to be aware of that could end up being a gotcha as you move toward certification for the organization. Brock, can I hand it back off to you, and you can talk a little bit about the other stuff there?
Yeah,
we can.
Thanks, John. I know we're kind of bumping up against time here, so I'll keep it short and quick. We really appreciate everybody for joining today. My email address was on the previous slide, so feel free to reach out to me with any questions or comments that you have on the webinar or any of the content that we covered today. And I think, Peter, we can jump right into the questions.
Yeah, we did have a question that came in here for 6.2. Do the documents need to be available to internal personnel or external customers, or both? And
Well,
so,
that's a great question. I think probably it's important for the organization as a whole to understand what objectives, information security objectives of the organization are. And as I mentioned, a lot of organizations include those information security objectives as part of their security awareness training, as you're talking about policy. I don't think it's a bad thing to provide your information security objectives to customers if that's something that is useful. When we talk about implementing ISO 27001, this question comes up, what things are impactful to your customers that can be beneficially leveraged as part of your implementation of ISO 27001. And I think 6.2 is an example where you can craft some information security objectives that will really resonate with your clients, and it might be something good to share with them. Even if you don't want to share the whole security policy, those objectives for information security could be a mantra for the organization as a whole.
All right, thank you for that, John. We've got 1 more minute. I'm going to throw 1 more question at you, and I think this may or may not take us over. But I know that, you know, one of the questions that come up as organizations are going through this transition is, what is the expected level of effort to comply with the changes? And, you know, specifically a question like, how much is it going to cost?
Yes, I've heard that question many times. How long is it going to take, and how much is it going to cost? And the answer to both of those questions is it depends. You know, it's going to depend on the organization, what the purpose of the organization is, what business is involved. If you're in a business that's highly regulated, you're going to have a little more work to do than an organization that is not handling regulated data, for example. Because there aren't any huge divergence in the intent of the standards between the 2 versions, it's not going to be anywhere as difficult to transition as it was, for example, from the 2005 version to the 2013 version. That was a whole rewrite of the general requirements, and it was a huge lift. We don't have that same mountain to climb this time. But again, I pointed out some of the controls that really need to be, the organization needs to be made aware of what's going to be required for compliance to those controls.
You know, that's always a loaded question, and that's my favorite answer. It depends. We use that answer a lot in marketing too, so you know, not necessarily what folks want to hear, but that's where, you know, companies like JBW and the whole team that you have there, that, you know, you guys are the experts, and getting, you know, answering those questions and really giving the guidance that companies are going to need to get them through this. That's where you come in, and you know, being that expert guide to kind of walk them through everything from cost to what, you know, implementing whatever it is that needs to be implemented, the analysis. That's, you know, that's where you come in. But thanks again, everyone, for joining. I know we've gone a little bit over time here, but we appreciate you taking the time. And also thanks to the team at JBW, you know, for getting all of this information together and presenting it. John, excellent job, you know, really analyzing just everything that's everything that goes into ISO and what companies need to be looking at. And, you know, the comparison that you've done with this version versus the 2013 version. I know that, you know, that's a lot of work it takes to do that and really present it in a way that's digestible and for folks to understand what the difference is. But look out, you know, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we do have some resources coming your way for everyone that's on here that registered. And also look out for our next event, which is going to be mid-December. We'll get you some more details on that as well. Yeah.